You are now watching The Meech.
I've gotten many requests to cover Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Kirby is one of my favorite series in gaming, and almost all the Kirby games are great. I love almost all the mainline games. Kirby Planet Robobot is my favorite in the series. Even less traditional games such as Kirby's Dream Land 3, I've enjoyed very much. But with that being said, I've made the observation that Kirby sorta peaked with Planet Robobot. It's everything I could ever want in a Kirby game, or even a 2D platformer for that matter. It has a ton of excellent new ideas, but it also retains what made Kirby games great. Robobot released almost 6 years ago, and I found the succeeding games to be a bit underwhelming. Kirby Star Allies released about 4 years ago, and the game was far too short and it didn't launch with enough content, because we all know how much I love a second free update that lets you enjoy golf.
A second free update that lets you enjoy golf.
But let's say the game launched with a great amount of content. The game itself was very play it safe, and it wasn't too interesting in my opinion. This led many to ask the question, what's next for Kirby? The unanimous answer was going into 3D, and here we are 3 decades later with the first ever 3D Kirby game. Now sure, there were side modes like Kirby's 3D Rumble, but this is the first full-on 3D platformer fans have been wanting for years. The Nintendo Switch just turned 5 years old, and what better way to celebrate than play the demo of Kirby and the Forgotten Land. The demo is actually pretty lengthy. There were 2 stages as well as a boss fight. What did I think of it? Here are my first impressions about Kirby and the Forgotten Land. The game begins with an opening cutscene showcasing how Kirby ended up in the abandoned land. I gotta say, I was very impressed with the quality of the cutscene. It straight up looks like what a Kirby movie would look like. I was most impressed with the amount of detail with the characters. You'll see the new fox enemies have realistic fur, and all the characters look great. But what I'm discussing here are the cutscenes. I have slightly different thoughts on the general presentation of the game, but as with any game, the gameplay is the most important factor. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a 3D platformer. There were questions as to whether or not it would be a linear 3D platformer or open world. We finally have the answer now. It's a linear 3D platformer. Some were disappointed to find out that it was an open world, but after playing it, I think it was a great decision. In an era where 3D platformers are a rarity, variety is everything. Considering Super Mario Odyssey and Bowser's Fury, it appears 3D Mario will continue to be open world. For Kirby, I think linear works better. If I had to compare Forgotten Land to a 3D Mario game, I would say it's more similar to the Galaxy games. The stages are large and have different objectives, such as making 5 tulips bloom as well as reaching the goal, similar to how the Galaxies have multiple missions. The reason why there was debate about Kirby going into 3D is because many of the gameplay mechanics seemingly wouldn't work in 3D. Kirby can float infinitely, and that would pose a problem in a 3D platformer. This was resolved by having Kirby only be able to float up until a certain height, and it's limited just like in Smash Bros. Another thing Kirby is known for is the copy ability. One of the reasons why Kirby games are so much fun is because it's fun to use the different abilities and see what they do. There are many enemies in the stages, so you have plenty of opportunities to try the abilities out. 3D platformers often have too few enemies that you'll encounter, but here, there are sections where you take out many enemies, sorta like a beat 'em up. It reminded me of Pac-Man World 3. I constantly was entertained playing Forgotten Land, and there was always something to do. The demo included a boss fight at the end, and rather than the traditional Wispy Woods, it was a new boss, Mondo. Kirby has always had great boss fights, and this was no exception. You start by exploring Pasco County's famous landmark Gulfview Mall, and Mondo makes a quite literal gorilla-style appearance watching Kirby through the window. Then the fight begins. If there's one thing that I didn't like in Super Mario Odyssey, it was the boss fights. They're too short and far too easy. Honestly, the only Mario games in the mainline series to have great boss fights were Super Mario Sunshine and the Galaxy games. The concepts for fights in Odyssey and 3D World were cool, but they were over before you could even enjoy them. But here, the boss fight is lengthier, and Mondo is quite intimidating. It was a blast fighting him. The gameplay is excellent, but as I stated before, my thoughts on the general presentation are a bit different. The game looks great. but I would've liked to see better textures for the characters. They don't have the same level of detail as they do in the cutscenes, and it's not a major issue, but it goes to show a more powerful Switch is necessary. The game also runs at 30 frames per second. It threw me off at first, but it really wasn't a huge deal. Really, these are just nitpicks in the grand scheme of the game. With excellent gameplay and a great presentation, what are my general thoughts on Forgotten Land? You ever wonder why I'm so critical of Nintendo? This is exactly why. When Switch games are good, they're unbelievably good, often the best in their series. This is why I criticize many Switch games, because the potential for an amazing game is often there, and it's disappointing seeing games not live up to their full potential. I'm very confident that this will become my favorite Kirby game. Honestly, I haven't been this excited for a game since Luigi's Mansion 3, and I cannot wait to play the full game. The last major 3D platformer made by Nintendo was Super Mario Odyssey. I absolutely love the game because of how creative it is and how it provided an incredible new experience. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is essentially the Breath of the Wild or Odyssey the Kirby series needed, but do I think it will be better than Odyssey? I would say in some aspects, yes. It already has better boss fights and enemy combat is far better, and I'm a huge fan of the structure of the game being similar to the Galaxy games. If you prefer linear 3D platformers, I can guarantee you'll prefer Forgotten Land, but it's sort of an apples and oranges comparison considering how different the games are. But if I can say anything for certain, it's highly likely Forgotten Land will become one of my favorite Switch games, and maybe even one of my favorite games. I couldn't recommend the demo enough, so play it now. So there you have it. Here are my thoughts on Kirby and the Forgotten Land. March 25th can't come soon enough. Okay, as awesome as the game is, it's even more awesome now because it's launching on Greek Independence Day. So what do you guys think? Anyways, thanks for watching, and Zito y Alada!